everybody, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 22 of Vinland Saga. I can't believe that we only have 3 episodes left of season 1. Like I said in several episodes, and I'm going to reach for my notes here, I don't feel bad necessarily. I don't feel sad because season 2 is coming so quickly. Now, talk to me at the end of season 2. I'm probably going to have a lot of different opinions, but I woke up this morning, I felt like Thorfinn. I felt like a rabid Wolverine. It was just like, I want to watch Vinland Saga. And so I actually have several notes because I've taken a little bit of time off recording between episodes 21 and 22. So I've had time for y'all to give me some really good notes to catch up on. So I've got some notes I want to go over. But yeah, last episode was pretty tragic. Bjorn's dead. R.I.P. Askelaad killed him in the duel, and it's been fun in the comments talking about like the meaning of that scene and how sincere Askelaad was about his relationship with Bjorn, how much he was just trying to like appease him before he died. What does that even mean? And then there's the tragedy of that, along with the tragedy of Thorfinn denying Leif and saying, no, I'm gonna stick with my plan to get revenge on Askelaad. He's turned down everything in the past, his own, ideas of running away, and he's like, no, I'm gonna do this. So it's kind of funny though, because we talk about this with other protagonists in other series, the idea of moving forward, and it's funny, right? Because I was thinking about this. I've watched Attack on Titan, I've watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, or I am watching that series, and I'm watching Death Note. And I will note that the 3 protagonists in those series, without spoiling anything, if you've not watched Death Note, Attack on Titan, or Neon Genesis, without spoiling anything, those 3 characters all have to deal with the idea of resolve and conviction and moving forward. And doing things no matter what the cost is, right? And a lot of them, and they all 3 struggle with that. But we root for them almost, right? You, in some weird, bizarre way, whether you like those characters or not, you kind of root for the fact that they move forward, and you respect the fact they move forward no matter what. And I was talking to my brother about it, and I was kind of lamenting the fact, I'm like, why? I feel like I don't quite root so much for Thorfinn moving forward with his goals, right, and his resolve. Because there's a part of me that's like, he's doing the same thing as those other 3 protagonists in that he's made his mind up that he has to kill Askelaad, he has to do this, and he has to move forward no matter what. But for some reason, I don't root for him doing that like I do with the other protagonists, right? I think him and Light Yagami I probably have the most confliction with, because I think with both of those characters, I'm like, but it could be this other way, but you're doing it this way, and I understand why they do it, but I find it funny that I can root for a character moving forward like maybe Shinji or Eren, but then I find more conflict with Light and Thorfinn. So it's interesting. Like I said, once I'm done with all 4 of those series, and originally I said 3, but now I'm like 4. Once I'm done with all 4 of those series, I want to do like a comparison, because they are such, and I feel like Eren and Light and Shinji are kind of colossal protagonists in the sense that they kind of take center stage, and Thorfinn has kind of fallen to the wayside. So maybe that's what my issue is that Thorfinn's kind of fallen back in favor of characters like Askelaad and Canute, who've kind of taken center stage at this point in the series, which is interesting. But we're going to talk about that all when I get caught up with season 2 of Vinland Saga and finish Attack on Titan completely, and I'll have finished Death Note and Neon Genesis by then. Then I want to kind of do a video. So it'll probably be a video about those 3 main ones and those series that will be done, and then Thorfinn will like guest starring Thorfinn from Vinland Saga, right? And comparing him with them. So that's something that I've been thinking about. But let's talk about these comments, because I'm wasting enough time already. Al Sora says, you can tell how selfish Thorfinn is, but we still root for him, and lines are drawn if we support Canute or Askelaad. That's a good point. So that kind of ties into this, that, yeah, you can tell that Thorfinn is being very selfish, but we still kind of want to root for him to make the right choice. And then it's interesting because Askelaad and Canute are kind of going along the same route, but they're in like parallel lines. Like you can see they're starting to kind of drift a little bit in their ideals and what they're after. So I find that interesting. Like, are we team Canute? Are we team Askelaad? Are we team Thorfinn? It's very intriguing, right? And as of right now, Askelaad's about to battle Thorfinn, and Canute's going to be the one to draw the line. So that's going to be interesting to see how that goes. I've got a couple comments from Ridasante, but this first one is like, Askelaad has the promises that he keeps to Artorias and his mother for their sake, and then the promises against his father's name. And I like that Ridasante noted there was a difference between that. There's the promises he keeps for his mother's sake and in the name of Artorias, and then there's the promises he keeps against the Danes because he hates his father. And so he doesn't deem the Norsemen as worthy of respect. But the thing of it is that Redesante points out is he doesn't respect them, but he's been in that lifestyle for so long that he kind of starts to like commit similar acts as them, whether he likes it or not. And I thought that really kind of tied to Thorfinn. Thorfinn doesn't respect Askelaad at all, but he's been there so long that he kind of has adopted that same mentality. So that's very interesting. That, again, those parallels between Thorfinn and Askelaad are interesting, right? And then the concept of somewhere not here. It was the title of the manga back in chapter 2, apparently, and it was the episode 1 title. And it's this idea of journeying somewhere away from the cycle of hatred and violence and that desperation that can't be reached. And so I think that that ties to why Thorfinn, he's asking Leif, he's like, tell me about Vinland. Tell me about that place of hope that I've not been able to get to yet. Like, I need to know that it's still there, right? So Thorfinn wants that realization that despite everything he's doing and all he's done, he's going to still be able to get to Vinland. There is hope that there's somewhere not here that he can eventually go to. And that's why I think that eventually he's going to try to get his way back to Leif, just he has to beat Askelaad first. That's his main objective. But once he does, that idea gives me a little bit of hope that Thorfinn's going to go back to Leif. The question is it going to be too late? Is he going to beat Askelaad and then get to Leif and it will be too late for him to make that connection? That's what's going to be frustrating, right? And then Rainhead of Shadow Clan talked about Thorkel and Thors. They're both around, you know, so much in the present time, but in the flashbacks of episode 19. Oh, so Thorkel, he's 50. I was like, what does my note say? Thorkel and Thors were both 50 in the present time. If Thors had been alive, he'd been 50 years old. So in the flashbacks, Rainhead of Shadow Clan did the math because I'm terrible at math. They did the math for me and I was like, thank you. So around the time of the flashbacks, Thorkel was 24 and 26 years have gone by since the flashbacks that we saw back in a few episodes ago when he was telling Thorfinn about him and Thor's past. So good to know. Thorkel's a very handsome guy for 50 years old. Kept that look about him. Apparently blood cleansed his skin, clearly. Or Asgeir knows a secret we don't know about. And so then Shimoyama talks about how Bjorn was a Dane that Askelaad hated, but his words of being a friend at least reached him. Like Bjorn at the end of the day when Askelaad killed him was someone, he was a Dane and Askelaad hated the Danes, but the fact that Bjorn's words reached him, that does mean something because Askelaad did respond to him. If Askelaad truly hated Bjorn and truly hated the Danes, so much that it included Bjorn, I don't think he would have responded with, you were my friend. Now, the question is, was Bjorn truly Askelaad's friend? Or was Askelaad just saying that to kind of give Bjorn some peace of mind as he died? That's not made explicit, and we've debated about that in the comments so much on Patreon and YouTube. But at the end of the day, the fact that Askelaad even said it means something. It means that Bjorn connected to him on some level. Whether it was true friendship or not, it was a connection, right? And Sacha had like a long post on Patreon, and I felt like I was defending myself, but I know that we kind of came to the conclusion at the end of it. We're like, that's what's great about these comments and about talking about series like these, especially ones that give you such like different opinions that you can debate about, is at the end of the day, it's fun because even if we don't agree with one another, it's like, I understand that other perspective, and I'm like, okay, I get where you're coming from. It's cool. And Sacha was like, I don't agree with everything you're saying, but, and so we had this really good discussion, but they were talking about Thorfinn's reasoning, which it makes sense why he's not going to live with Leif. I wish he would, but it's a pipe dream on my part, and I'm aware of that. But Askelaad, his complexity with both Bjorn and Thorfinn. We talked a lot about whether or not Thorfinn, if he's truly like a father figure to Thorfinn. And I joked way back, like at the beginning of this series, that Bjorn and Askelaad were like the most bizarre, like parental figures to Thorfinn. But they kind of are. Are they good parental figures? Well, I think Thorfinn's kind of the case in point to that. That Thorfinn being a feral wolf child maybe shows that they aren't the best parents. They're definitely no Thors, no Helga, but they clearly have cared to an extent. Now, I'm still on the fence of whether or not last episode I was like, oh, Askelaad, he would leave Thorfinn. He would leave him. He would abandon him for Canute if he could. I'm still on the fence because Sasha was arguing that he wouldn't. And I'm like, I don't know. Because he left him back at London. He left him, but Askelaad left him under the assumption he knew Thorfinn would come back. So that shows that Askelaad had faith in Thorfinn, and he believed he was strong enough that he would come back. But I'm like, I'm still not entirely convinced at the end of the day if it came down to choosing Canute and the path towards protecting the Welsh and his mother's honor, or picking Thorfinn, I think he'd pick the former, but I'm not sure. We'll see this episode, right? We'll see what else comes out with it. Alan Acevedo talked about how Bjorn fought for Askelaad to understand him in battle and expressed his feelings. And I couldn't help but make this comment that it was like, I was thinking in my head, I was like, oh my God, it's like Free. It's like, if you've ever watched Free, Iwatobi Swim Club, which is the most polar opposite of series as this series as you could ever find. But there's a character in that series, like the big joke in the series is that Haru is our protagonist, and you'll understand Haru once you swim with him. It's very cheesy and wonderful, and I eat it up like a bowl of ice cream. But there's a character in there that's arguing, another character like hates Haru, and he's like, I don't like Haru. Why do you all like him? And the other character's like, if you swim with him, you'll understand. it's exactly like you think it is. But it kind of, I got those vibes with Bjorn that he's like, I'll understand Askelaad once I fight with them. Like, it's the idea that you'll understand someone once you duel with them. You'll get their true intentions, right? That's the total vibe that I got with Bjorn versus Askelaad, and I was kind of having a really good time with that comment, Alan, so that was really great. But yeah, Bjorn just wanted to express his feelings to Askelaad, and for the Danes, battling is how they express that emotion. It's kind of the same way with Thorkel. Thorkel expresses himself on the battlefield. It's just the way their culture is. And so Bjorn was like, I want to tell you that we're friends, Askelaad, but the only way I can do that is if we duel. So, and Askelaad's like, Baka, I gotta kill you now, and now you tell me we're friends? Why couldn't you tell me that over the campfire, you know? So it's funny just to see how these characters express themselves, and that comment was really good. And then finally, Redesante, talking about King Swin, that I like this idea Redesante pointed out, that King Swin is not just an evil king or a weak king trope. He doesn't fall. That's what I've been afraid about this whole series. I've been afraid that Swin would be that trope of the weak or evil king, and he'd be very one-dimensional. But these last couple episodes, even though we don't get a lot with Swin, we do get the idea that there's more to him than that. He is more multidimensional. He is a thinking king. He's got strategy. He has politics in mind. He's more fleshed out than I thought he was going to be, and I'm happy about that. I really like it, right? But he noted that the speech about the crown that he does in that episode kind of mirrors, in episode 20, mirrors King Richard III, which is in a Shakespearean play, like his talk about the crown. It's a little different, but has some similar elements. But I like this comment that Redesante made, and I'll close on this because we've talked for a long, long time in this intro. But I will note that Canute looks less and less innocent as we go in this series. Like his face gets more and more kind of like grimacy and more not masculine necessarily, but kind of gets less innocent and gets more and more menacing as we go. And that kind of is the more we get to be revealing on Canute, the less of a summer child Canute is revealed to be, and more of like someone with an agenda. And I'm like, So it's like there is no safe, innocent summer child character in this series, except maybe Leaf. Except Leaf. Leaf is our only sweet summer child, and I love him, and I feel very sad for him. But yeah, I really liked those comments, so thank you all very much. This has been like the longest intro to this series ever, but it felt warranted, right? So we're on episode 22, and we're about to dive in. 3 episodes left for season 1. I'm pretty excited. I hope y'all are too. But in any case, we're going to start episode 22 of Vinland Saga, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1... And let's just see how this duel with Thorfinn and Askelaad goes. Well, that was not the episode I expected. No, not at all. Not at all. Wow. Okay, so I thought it was going to be this big duel that Thorfinn actually stood a chance. No, Askelaad's like, you've not learned anything. After 11 years, you haven't learned. And maybe now that this episode has happened, I'll go back to my comment that I started with before this reaction and being like, what has been my deal with Thorfinn, and why can't I quite, connect with him? Because if I'm going to put over here, in this little, kind of arrange whiteboard kind of a little differently here, but over here in the corner, you have these protagonists, and I'm going to, whiteboard coon is leaning on me, space whiteboard coon. But if we look at things this way, it's okay, with your protagonists, anytime you have a protagonist in a series, the idea is that they start at point A, and by the end of a point, they have moved into point B. Even if it's a little bit, right? Now, granted, I'm gonna, play devil's advocate here. We're not at the end of the season yet. So there is a very good chance, especially now that Askelaad's had this come to terms with his past with Thorfinn, there's a very good possibility that Thorfinn is going to maybe take something from this, possibly, and apply it by the end of the series, and will lead him to go from point A to point B. But I think my biggest issue with Thorfinn is that he has been quite stagnant throughout this series. And it's not really Thorfinn's, it is his fault, but it's kind of not his fault because he's not really had any guidance, right? We talk about Askelaad being like a fatherly figure to him. Well, Askelaad, Thor's even commented way back in episode 4, he's like, do you have any children? And Askelaad's like, no. And that all makes sense now too, because I was like, really, Askelaad doesn't have any kids? He's a Viking. You think that he'd pillage and plunder and take all these women? No, because Askelaad hates that lifestyle. He hates that. So we're going to put Askelaad over here. And so the idea that he is not a father or husband makes a lot of sense because he was a bastard child, quote unquote, and talks about how his dad had all these kids everywhere and didn't pay them no mind unless he saw potential in them. And even then he didn't care, right? Like basically they abandoned his mom like out in the cold post that, taking Askelaad in. Like it was basically him having to abandon. That's the one aspect we don't really talk about in this episode is once his father took him into the hall, does that mean his mom was just kind of abandoned? We don't get, that's the one thing we miss. We see Askelaad get old enough to kill his dad. So he was 13. He said he was 11 when he was taken in, and he was 13 when he killed his father. So we'll put this on here that he was 11 when he first dueled his dad, right? And he was 13 when he killed him. I'm guessing that around the time he killed his father and they framed, and I like this, we'll talk about this, he framed the brother for the murder. Around that time, he probably went back, got his mother, or he found out his mother. I'm wondering if his mother, about to die, maybe spurned him in that moment. Because there's that question of, well, why 2 years? Why only 2 years? Why as much as 2 years? 2 years is a considerable amount of time, but not a lot of time, right? Because he was getting to know his father and earning his trust this whole time so he could eventually betray him. And so there's that question of, well, why specifically 2 years? Does that seem like long enough? My theory is that his mother died or was about to die around that time, and Askelaad was like, I want to take her back to her people. And so that may have spurred him into action. There's a little bit of a gap in the timeline that we still don't have answers to. You can kind of mentally as the audience connect, okay, well, Askelaad's about the same age he was when he took, but although was he 17 when he took his mom back? Was he Thorfinn's age when he took his mom back? Maybe that was the case. So again, there's little gaps in the timeline, but there has been a time he killed his father and then took his mother back to Wales. So there is a little bit of time there. Now, whether it's months, years, I'd have to go back and watch that episode where we find that out about his original backstory, where we first see young Askelaad. But all makes sense. It makes sense why he doesn't have any kids. He did not want to be the type of person that his father would. He hated his father so much, he wanted to be the exact opposite of him. And that would be like and that explains why when Canute asks, well, why wouldn't you want to be king? He's like, did you not get it? I hated who my father was. My father was a person in power like a king of our area that I grew up in. I despised that man. Why would I want to share that same fate as him? He's like, no. He's like, I don't want to be that person. So that all makes sense. The fact that he didn't take a wife, that he didn't do that, it all connects back to him hating his father and everything he represented. So, God, this was a great look into Askelaad and his character and just trying to explain to Thorfinn. Like, he takes the time to be like, look. And Askelaad, in some respects, both Askelaad and Thorfinn are lone wolves. Askelaad's like, only Askelaad saying, I was a lone wolf. I was cunning and I did what had to be done and I went for the throat and I learned you're just a dog chasing food. You're nowhere near where I was. And he's like, you've spent 11 years doing nothing. You've let me use you. You've not learned. And to be fair, for Thorfinn's sake, Thorfinn was 6. He was 6 years old, right? He was 6 years old. But there is a difference there. There is a difference. And I'll put kind of up here with Thorfinn. There is a difference, right? And I want to talk about this. That Askelaad with his mom, with his mother, he talks about how he took her teachings and stories to heart. He says that she said them so many times over and over again that he started to believe them himself, right? And whereas Thorfinn, with Thor's, he resisted those stories and never truly believed them, right? Now, there is kind of a weirdness to this, because at some point, Askelaad, from that moment, he realized he had to take action himself. And we'll talk about that. He had to take action himself. There's so many like weird comparisons and contrasting elements with Thorfinn and Askelaad in this episode. But the one thing about it is that Askelaad took his mother's teachings to heart. He believed her stories. He heard them so many times, he started to believe them, and he thought that they could come true. Thorfinn, from the very first couple episodes, Thor's had tried to tell him these stories over and over again, and Thorfinn kind of resisted them. He was like, well, why is that? I don't believe that. The only one he believes, and this kind of compares to Askelaad, oddly enough, is the only one he believes is the story about Vinland and about there being hope. And Askelaad has the same thing with Avalon, or he did. His Avalon was Thorfinn's Vinland. And so it's this weird dynamic where you have two characters that as children, Askelaad hung on to every word his mother said, including Avalon. And Thorfinn kind of resisted everything his father was saying, except for Vinland. Vinland and Avalon were the two aspects that both Askelaad and Thorfinn kind of clung onto from their parents. Everything else they kind of conflicted with or went along with, and it kind of varies, but not the idea of Vinland and Avalon. Those two things they believed for the longest time. And we'll talk about how that kind of changes, right? And what we do with that. But of course we get Bjorn dying, and Askelaad's just not in the mood. He's like, maybe because he had to kill his only friend, maybe because he had to like come to grips with the fact that he did show compassion towards a Dane that he hates. And he calls himself a Viking in the end. So he's like, I'm no different. He's like, I hate warriors, but at the end of the day, he calls himself a Viking. He's like, I cannot escape the fact that is, in fact, what I have become. He's like, I've become a Viking, whether I like it or not. I adopted this lifestyle. And Bjorn recognized me as his friend, so who could be his friend but a Viking, right? So that's so intriguing that Askelaad knows what he's become, and he's very self-aware of the route that he's taken to get here. Thorfinn does not seem self-aware. He starts to get self-aware at the end of this episode, the very last part where he screams, and the voice acting from Thorfinn's voice actor, Umura, Yudo Umura, like his voice acting at the end was just this gargled, strangled scream was so good. I was like, yes, that was perfect. That's starting to become self-aware of, you've wasted so much time. You've wasted all this time. So I'm going to skip the intro because there's a lot to talk about in here. But yeah, even Thorfinn knows that the air is different between them. He's like, what's going on? And Askelaad's just not having it. So I want to put Thorkel and Canute over here. Put Thorkel and Canute. And put them out here. Thorkel bets against his own nephew, which I find kind of hilarious. That he doesn't think that Thorfinn's going to win. And Canute realizes he's kind of in the dark about all of this. He's in the dark about Thorfinn and Askelaad and their relationship. He doesn't know about all the previous duels. And Thorkel's kind of in the same thing. And so they talk about the betting and everything, and Canute's like, well, I'm going to keep them from killing each other because that seems rather dumb. We might need them both in the future. Why would I let them kill each other? And Thorkel, he thinks that Askelaad's going to win. I like that Thorkel gets mad, though, when Canute's like, well, Thorfinn beat you, so... And he's like, are you saying I'm the third best in this group? I love that technically, yes, Thorkel, you are, but by that logic, by the logic that you think Askelaad could beat Thorfinn and Thorfinn beat you. But I just love that he gets so mad. It's kind of cute. He's just like, But it's like, Prince, who do you think I am? It's great. And Canute's like, you did this to yourself. What are you talking about? But in any case, he talks about it's not as simple as who's weaker and who's stronger. Yeah, Thorkel and Askelaad kind of operate on this mentality of, no, there's a lot more to it than that. Anybody can lose on the battlefield. Bjorn, by that logic, Bjorn was one of the stronger people, but he lost because of numbers, because of the strategy. That's why he lost. It didn't matter whether... Bjorn was stronger than Alti. Like, there's no question. But Alti didn't just charge at Bjorn by himself. There were other people involved, and it's not just a matter of who is stronger and weaker. That's not how battle works. And I don't think Thorfinn is stuck in that mentality of being a warrior equals that strength. But as Thorkel and Askelaad have shown, it's not just about physical strength. There's a lot more to it than that. And to Thorfinn's credit, he's been this dog, basically, this puppy that's wandered around with no one to guide him for 11 years. And those are 11 of the most formidable years of his life. Askelaad, by comparison, Askelaad's like, my mother, he worked in a blacksmith shop. He worked with men that made weapons, that I'm sure that swordsmen came to get those weapons constantly. So Askelaad was in an environment where he could learn. But here's the thing, Askelaad wanted to learn. He wanted to learn what they were teaching because he knew it would help out his mother, right? He knew that he had to become strong to help his mom stay, completely and coherent in that village. So he's like, he had to learn from his jobs, and he did the work and put an effort to learn because he knew it was to save someone. Thorfinn has no one to save or protect. That's kind of a big thing in all of this, is that Thorfinn, he has no one but himself. And so he has no other agenda. It's just revenge. He only has himself and revenge. Right? It's not like his father's injured and he's protecting his dad along the way. No, his father's dead. He has no one. His parents and sister are off. He's cut off from them when he's 6 years old and his father's first killed. He only has revenge. And so he has no reason to want to get close to the Vikings, or so he thinks, right? Thorfinn believes that there's no reason for him to get close to the Vikings. So all these years, he's kept a literal wall between him and those men. In all the episodes we've seen Thorfinn in, he has not engaged with the Vikings. He's kept to himself. He hasn't tried to learn about their culture. He's just followed along and gone through the motions, thinking that it will earn him the right to battle Askelaad. And Askelaad's like, you don't get it. He's like, I hated the Danes, but I integrated in them to learn from them so I could get my revenge against them. He's like, you've been going about revenge the wrong way. It's not about overpowering somebody or getting strong enough to do it. He's like, that is not going to get you your revenge. He's like, this will. He's like, I spent years like being the good son and getting in my father's good graces, getting in his inner circle so I could kill him in his sleep. He's like, back when Thorfinn, could have killed Askelaad in his sleep and he didn't, he's like, that's where you made the mistake. He's like, you should have done it while you had the chance. Although at the time, Askelaad was fully conscious and would have stopped Thorfinn, so that wasn't even really an option. But the strategy was there. He's like, your strategy should have been to get to the point where you could sneak up on me and kill me in my sleep. But you've not done that this whole time. And we'll talk about that. But, oh my God. So he's like, the fun part, Thorkel's like, the fun part about battle is that you can't ever predict who's going to win and who's going to lose. It's not easy to rank people. That's what's fun. He's like, battles can be unpredictable, which checks out with his character because that explains why he was fighting alongside London during that battle. He's like, well, this side doesn't seem like the winning side, but let's make it interesting. Who knows what'll happen, right? And Canute's like, I'm not interested. And he's like, you must be a woman. Poor Canute. He goes throughout this entire series and everybody keeps saying he's a woman. What can he do? Canute's like, why can't I just be me? But he's like, what's wrong, Thorfinn? Come on. I think it's very interesting that Askelaad, he abandons the sword. He abandons the sword. I feel like Askelaad he's reached the true warrior level where he's like, a true warrior does not need a sword. It's like, I don't need it. I know you too well, Thorfinn. And it's that ties to Thor's, that he doesn't need it. It's so good. It ties to Canute. I love it. He's like, I want to finish this before the snow gets worse. I like later on that he dusts off the spot on the ledge. He's like, I ain't sitting in this snow. And then he just lets the sword go, being like, I have no choice but to fight you with my frickin' bare hands. I was worried for Askelaad in this, but damn, he not only fights Thorfinn with 2 knives with his bare hands, but then at the very end of the battle, he picks up Bjorn and walks away. Like, I was thinking Askelaad was injured, but old man, his natural born talent for battle, right? The sad thing is that Askelaad looks so much like his father, and you know he can't help that. And it's like, And I'm sure that he hates that he looks like the man. He looks so much like the man that he despised. He's like, you don't understand why it turns out like this, do you? And of course Thorfinn doesn't. And he tries to kick him. And the Askelaad just headbutts him. He's like, nope. Oh. I'm like, poor Edward Scissorhands Thorfinn. He just doesn't. Oh, and that punch. He's like, nope. He's like, I'm about to give you a scolding. Like, you need to be taught a lesson, kid. He's like, we keep doing... And Thorkel's like, oh, this isn't a duel. He's like, this is not a duel. This is like a parent teaching his kid a lesson. Like, you just don't learn. He's like, what's the reason for the duel? That's brought up in here. Like, and Canute's like, I don't know why they keep doing this. And Askelaad kind of tells Thorfinn, he's like, why are we still doing this? Like, what's the point? You don't get it, do you? And he's like, unbelievable. And he just like pops his shoulders back. He's like, you never learn, kid. Did you get full of yourself after you beat Thorkel? And the sad thing is that Thorfinn did not beat Thorkel on his own. If Askelaad hadn't helped him, he wouldn't have beat Thorkel. And I almost feel like back then that may have been a moment where Askelaad was like, hey kid, you really want revenge on me? Like, come on. And Askelaad's, he's right. He's like, eventually down the road, it's going to get to the point where Askelaad is too old to battle Thorfinn. The age difference between them is going to be in Thorfinn's favor at some point. But Askelaad's so pissed off because he's like, are you just going to keep following me around like a dog and not learning anything and being a baka until it gets to the point where technically you have to win? He's like, you're going to waste your entire life chasing me for no reason when you could have gotten this over with a long time ago? He's like, really? That's where we're at? And I think that's why he tells him the story now. He's like, I don't want you to chase me until I'm 80 years old. Don't waste your life. He's like, I'm sick of you. Yeah, and Canute's like, oh, he's going to kill him. Now, the question is, would Askelaad have actually killed him in this moment? I don't think he would have. I don't know, but I don't think he would have. I think he would have spared him still. But the fact that and by being sick of Thorfinn, he's sick of Baka Thorfinn. He's sick of the fact that kid has not learned. That he's not learning what he's supposed to. Now, you could make the argument that Askelaad could have had this conversation with Thorfinn a long time ago, but would he have been... Then, of course, that brings up the question, was Askelaad even in a place to have this conversation in the snow? The fact that Canute... I would argue there was not a good time before now for him to have that conversation with Thorfinn that he has in this episode, because in all the other duel scenarios, the Vikings have all been there, and the Vikings were like, no, fight to the death, fight till somebody loses. There wasn't time for story time, right? And here, Thorkel and Canute are in a place where they can stop the battle, and Askelaad knows that Canute is not going to let either of them die, so he feels now he can make that conversation. And he's like, did you think you could beat me with one arm? Like, did you get cocky, kid? I honestly thought that maybe he could have. And he's like, come on. I'm feeling damn good. Oh my gosh, Askelaad. And I want to make note, Canute holding Thorfinn in his arms is the last thing I expected to happen in this series. My, how the tables have turned. 10 episodes ago, if you had told me that Canute was going to be holding Thorfinn in his arms, cradling him, I would have laughed. I would have been like, you're joking. No. Like, we went from sweet summer child Canute being protected by Thorfinn over a fish dinner to him cradling him like a damn BL couple again and being like, hello. Only this time, Thorfinn's like, Thorfinn and his tsundere-ness. Which, no, it's not. That's not even tsundere. It's just really funny because I was shipping Canute and Thorfinn for a while, and then when Thorfinn abandoned Canute to go get Askelaad, I was like, well, that ship sunk. And now I'm kind of like, oh, well, maybe there's a yacht. Maybe. I think Edgar in the Discord was talking about they don't like ships, they like yachts. And I was like, maybe this is a yacht. Like a sailboat. A little sailboat. To just give the fandom something. And of course, Canute's like, oh, good, you're safe. And then I like that Canute's trying to be rational. He's like, hey, the duel's over. And Thorfinn instantly goes into like feral dog mode. He's like, where is he? And like, rabid dog. And Canute's like, whoa, you've had your rabies shot. Calm down. Like, chill out. You're not fighting him anymore. You lost. And all Thorfinn can think about in the moment is that he's back to the drawing board. He's just like zooming around. And Canute's like, come on, get it together. We're the same age. Yeah, the fact that Canute and him are the same age. Like, Canute seems wise beyond his years now compared to our feral dog boy. And I think that's intentional. He's like, he's already delivered the death blow. You would have died otherwise. And Thorfinn's like, I still can't beat him. And then Canute says, start over. Once your arm's healed, start over. Just go back to square one. It's not like you've done that how many times now? And that's what Thorfinn gets so mad about. Because he's like, he keeps going back. And Askelaad's like, it's going to end up the same way because this kid doesn't learn. He's an idiot who loses because he's an idiot. It's like, you know how to think. Normally you know how to think while you fight. He's like, but once you lose your temper, it all goes to waste. He's like, your biggest weakness is your anger. And you don't know how to channel that anger. He says, does not know how to channel that anger. He's like, I'm going to teach you how to kill someone. If you hate them, here's how you kill them. There's that phrase, you keep your friends close and your enemies closer. He's like, yeah. He's like, I'm going to show you how this is. He's like, waving your sword around is how an idiot fights. Everyone's the same. He's like, all you Vikings are the same. He's like, Bjorn is right. I hate warriors. He hates warriors, especially Norse warriors, Vikings. But then at the very end, he says that he's a Viking, so he hates himself for what he's had to do. I don't know. But he talks about the first man he ever killed was not a beautiful man. It was his father. Yeah. So we get this awesome backstory with Askelaad. And he's Cinderella! I think I've said that a few episodes ago. But yeah, he's basically Cinderella. It was the episode Crown, episode 20, when we got his name meant ashes. And it was like, no, Askelaad is literally a Viking Cinderella. And he grew up like working in the stables and the black ship shops around all the coal and everything. And so he didn't even have a name. He was the son of a slave without a name, and he earned the nickname Askelaad. And he did all the work because his mother was sick, like him chopping the wood and everything. Ever since I was old enough to remember. And it just shows like him doing all the work, right? And so his upbringing is quite different from Thorfinn's. Like Thorfinn, it's different but similar because both Askelaad and Thorfinn both grew up doing all these chores and helping out their households and doing all the work. But Thorfinn had like a good support system around him. And Askelaad had none practically. His mother was sick and his father was non-existent. So it's so curious because growing up, Askelaad had such harsher conditions than Thorfinn. And Thorfinn, it's almost suggesting Thorfinn was a little spoiled as a child. And so then when that was taken away, he didn't have any foundation to fall back on. So he just became this feral dog boy. Whereas Askelaad, he had to build his own foundation from the start. So he had to scrounge his way up. And so he had more self-sufficiency and more independence kind of built into him from the start. And that's not Thor's fault. It's not Thorfinn's fault. It's just the difference between the two of them, right? It's something that can't be helped. And you just see like him saying it means covered in ash. And then we say Olaf has returned. And it's so sad how his father looks just like him. Like they're so similar. Which makes me wonder if that's why he keeps his hair cut short. because his father has hair long. He doesn't want to be he doesn't want to like connect to his father, so he kept his hair cut short. He loved booze, women, and killing people. And really, honestly, I think the only thing that Askelaad does not like killing people. He doesn't like women, and he doesn't like booze. So keeps very different from his father. He was a Viking like those you'd find anywhere else. He was no different. He had lots of kids with random women here and there. So yeah, he just whored around all these women, didn't care. The only sons he kept with him were the ones from his legal wife. His actual wife. He has 3 sons with them. Interesting. Yeah, and they all look kind of different than him. He probably didn't even know what his other kids look like. Which is curious, because he does seem to recognize Askelaad, but Askelaad looks so much like him. And yeah, the idea, it's so curious, his mom telling the stories and looking off into the sunset, and then it kind of relates to like Thor's up on the hill in episode 1 telling Thorfinn about it as they look beyond the hill there. There's so many similarities between the 2 characters. It's so interesting. He's like, the idea that his mother had been favored, and his mother looked a lot like Helga, like his mother had been favored until she'd become frail. So there's that difference between Thorfinn's father and Askelaad's father, and that Thorfinn's father, Thor's, and despite being a Viking, he loved Helga, and despite her being sickly, he took great care of her and his family. Like, he was a really good father, a really good family man, and took care of his family. Whereas Askelaad's father, the fact that she was sick, he threw her out in the stable. Like, polar opposite. Didn't care about her kid, didn't care about any of that. And so he talks about how his mother believed that Artorius would return to free her from illness and enslavement. That Artorius would come back to save their people. And Askelaad's like, well, but our people hadn't been saved for 500 years. And he's like, eventually, he's like, I realized that the paradise that had been promised was not something that was going to just come. Wasn't just going to arrive. Someday the legendary hero would come and conquer the world. And we're going to tie this back to Canute here in a second. But that hero hasn't appeared in 500 years. And so there's this talk, there's this connection to Canute and to Thorfinn, right? So there's this idea that's brought up about paradise and this hero, and I guess you could connect it to God, right? So the paradise, hero, and God kind of analogy kind of applies to all 3 of them, right? In Thorfinn's case, Thorfinn keeps believing that there is a paradise beyond the violence. There's somewhere where the violence will end, right? He connects that to Vinland. And then you have Askelaad, who connected the hero Artorius to his mother's teaching, that Artorius would come and save and rescue his people. And then you have the concept of God that ties to Canute, and the idea that God will have mercy and punish the wicked. And all 3, well, at least in Askelaad and Canute's case, Askelaad, I'm going to put just ask and can. Askelaad and Canute have come to realize, they've both come to determine that they have to take action. Askelaad comes to the realization that no, Artorius is not coming back. He's not coming to save our people. It's been 500 years. That he's going to have to do it himself. If anybody is going to rescue his mother and rescue his people, he has to do it himself. He can't rely on Artorius to get the job done. Canute believes that God is not going to save them from their struggles, that they're going to have to take action to make that happen. So he believes that they have to create, which creating the paradise kind of ties to Thorfinn as well, create paradise themselves and save themselves. So again, him and Askelaad and Canute have both come to the determination that they have to be able to do this by themselves. Thorfinn, it's a little bit more complicated because Thorfinn asks Leif how Vinland is. So Thorfinn still has that belief that they can make it to that place where that violence stops. He still believes in Vinland, right? Whereas Askelaad and Canute seem to have given up on those angles. Thorfinn still believes it exists. He asked Leif about it. So Thorfinn's not quite, it's a very odd balance that Thorfinn has that Canute and Askelaad do not. Where Thorfinn has took it upon himself to get revenge, and he still believes that getting to Vinland is possible. But as Askelaad is pointing out, the way that Thorfinn is going about this in Askelaad's mind is the wrong way. He's like, if you wanted to kill me, he's like, you should have respected me from the start. You should have let me take you under my wing. You should have let me teach you everything you know. I've been trying to give you little kernels of advice along the way, and you don't listen. He's like, if you really wanted to kill me, then you should have made me your best friend, like I did my father. And then you could have gotten to the point where you could kill me. You could have earned my trust along the way, and you could have gotten strong enough and dueled me and won. If you had just contained your temper and channeled that into something else. Because what Askelaad's saying is I channeled my anger. He's like, I channeled my anger with my father, and I made it a weapon. He's like, I went into the hall. I was the nice son. I became friends with my half-brothers. I got them all to trust me and love me. And it was just to the point where I could kill my father, blame my brother for it, and move on. And go from there. He's like, that's what you should have done, Thorfinn, from the start. He's like, that took me 2 years. You've been at this, 11 years? And you've not gotten anywhere close to where I was. So yeah, he basically just says, I had to do it myself. He says, when I was 11, my mother's heart finally snapped. And it was that and it's that tie of her with the cloth out in the snow. Which I'm guessing that it's tying the OP. The OP is tying the scene of her with the cloth when meeting his father again to him out in the snow telling Thorfinn the story. Right? Mm-hmm. And she runs into... And it's the irony of all ironies that she believes that her former lover, that his father was Artorius. And it looked like... And she was just so... Like, her mind had just snapped at that point. And he was going to kill her. Olaf was going to kill that woman, his mom. And in that moment, Askelaad's like, oh, hell no. And decides no, and he fights back to save her. And that's the thing. He fought his father to save his mom in that moment. He took up the sword and just went at it, right? He's like, if Artorius wasn't going to save my mother in that moment, I would do it myself. And then, and it's kind of, again, to Thorfinn's credit and stuff, Thorfinn and Askelaad both seem to have natural ability with weapons. It's like in their blood, right? And so it's such a weird contrast too, because Thorfinn, he has a natural fighting ability like his father, right? But Thorfinn doesn't seem ashamed of it or proud of it. He's kind of indifferent about it. He doesn't even really acknowledge it because he was 6 years old. He doesn't quite know. But Askelaad, he realizes, he's like, I have to do it. Not a person, not a hero, not a god. He's like, I took up the sword, and he's like, I'm ashamed that I realized I was a good natural sword fighter, and I thought it was because I had my father's blood that was true. Now, he says in the moment, I'm going to try to find the subtitle here. He's like, it's weird. He's like, I had never used a sword before, but it felt right in my hands. He's like, I knew how to swing it. And he says, I thought of it as proof that I had the blood of that damn bastard flowing in my veins. Yeah, so he's like, it's not Artorius. He's like, it's proof that I was my father's son. And it made me want to cry. I'm so ashamed. Yeah, because he thought that I'm a good sword fighter because I'm Olaf's child. Yeah, and it's so scary how much similar they look. Ugh. And then his dad takes him in. I succeeded in getting my father to notice me. And I behaved myself in the hall. So he's like, Thorfinn, if you got to where I noticed you, but you didn't behave yourself. He's like, you didn't behave yourself to get closer to me to kill me. He's like, you ran away instead and kept your distance. He's like, I didn't slack off in my training for the military arts or horsemanship. I even got along well with my half-brothers. He's like, I did everything I could to get stronger. Askelaad's like, I learned all that I could. I made all the connections. I did everything I could to get as close as possible so I could kill him. He's like, and you didn't do any of that, Thorfinn. And then I do like saying, and the sad thing is like, his brothers all got close to him, right? And then his father, that moment where his father just gives him a little pat on his face, like he fights his father and duels him. And then, but he he doesn't get mad. He learns from it and he accepts it. And the moment he comes up and just goes, pat, pat, like pats him on the face. Like, I was a loyal son and didn't forget that he saved me from my life as a slave. But that's the thing. He didn't forget that he'd saved him from his life as a slave, but he also didn't forget that he was a slave because of his father. So that's the thing. He didn't forget everything his father gave him, but he also didn't remember everything that he came up from his father. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. And that shot of his brothers, and his brothers all kind of looking like him. Like there's 4 brothers. He has 4 other brothers, and they all kind of look similar to him. Everyone started to accept me as my father's son. And then we see time pass, and he looks a little bit older, right? And everybody like bows to him. He looks a little bit older. But he's not quite as old as he is when he takes his mom back. He's cut his hair shorter, but then he's grown it back out when he takes the mom back. Yeah, I worked on it for 2 years. And he's going through the town, so it makes me wonder if like he went to see his mother like right before he killed his dad. And then yeah, he slit the throat of the woman that... Now, this woman, is that his legal wife or is that another concubine? We don't know. She looks awfully young, so I don't know if she's just another one of his ladies. But yeah, he stabbed him through the throat and killed the woman. I was after 2 things. I wanted to catch him with his guard down, and I wanted the right to inherit his property. Oof. Look at a picture of him in that face. That's so good. Yeah, he's like, I wanted to catch him off guard, but he's like, I wanted to still have the right to get his property. So that's the thing. He wanted the right to still be someone that can inherit from him. So he couldn't just, kill his other brothers. And then he starts laughing. He's like, I wish you could have seen it. He had a look on his face like, why? And like, he's like asking like, why? Like, of course, like, how could you even ask that? You should know why I killed you. And Thorfinn's just like, and it's hard to tell. It's hard to gauge Thorfinn's expressions because his face is all battered up. He's just looking at him. And Canute's like, oh God. And there's that connection to Canute. Like, Canute in that moment connects to Askelaad as well because Canute's father was equally as cruel. And as far as we know, Canute's dad may have been a step up from Olaf, that we don't know for certain, or at least I don't remember from the previous episodes, if Canute's mother was a slave, or she seems like she was a concubine. So she was a step up from Askelaad's mom. And Canute's father, Swin, at least named him and made him like a possible heir to the throne. Askelaad was like at the bottom of the barrel, right? But he says, I used my brother's sword, and I chose someone who didn't get along with my father and stole his sword. So one of the brothers didn't get along with the dad, and Askelaad, he learned from the relationships by being with his half-brothers. He learned about who got along with who, and then he used that knowledge and was like, I'll frame my one brother who doesn't like my father. And he's like, they thought he was the one who did it and hung him. And it's weird because the one that they hung kind of looks like Thorfinn a little bit. It's weird. We don't see his face. We just see that mess of hair. And they have the knives and stuff stuck in him like the other Vikings. So clearly it was a brother that maybe wasn't one of the main brothers. I don't know. He looks scrawnier. But yeah, he says they're stupid and filthy. They have nothing except for their own greed. So him saying that he hates the Danes because they're all stupid and greedy. Which, with the exceptions of Bjorn and Thor's and somewhat Thorkel and Canute, that's been pretty much proven accurate, like his assessment of how the Vikings have been in this series. And he says people without beauty like them started popping up everywhere. He's like, there were no longer like beautiful people that were beyond warriors. He's like, that wasn't it anymore. And throwing their weight around. There's no end to it no matter how many I kill. He's like, it doesn't ever stop. He's like, there's always these people in the world and I can't ever find an end to it. And then he's like, fine. He's like, I realize that I don't care what kind of final end of days. He's like, if you're going to come, then you better hurry. It's like, if you're going to attack me, then you better just get it over with. It's like, they're not going to let me keep on living either, though. And then he's like, okay, flashback over, lesson done. Anyway, Thorfinn, that was a long story. He's like, you can't even kill me even though it's been 10 years. That means you're an idiot. He's like, you've learned nothing. Which, and the thing of it is, Askelaad's like, I didn't have someone teach me how to get revenge. He's like, I figured it out for myself. He's like, my mother didn't tell me what to do to get revenge on my father. She was in no mental state to do so. He's like, I learned. I was observant and perceptive and learned from the people around me, and I figured out those conclusions for myself. I realized if I was going to chase revenge, I had to do it this certain way to be successful. He's like, you are blindly chasing revenge. You're not observing. You're looking, but you're not observing. You're hearing, but you're not listening. That's what he's saying. He's like, you're just existing. You do not have a clear-cut way to achieve your goal. He's like, and that's what you're lacking, and that's why you fail. Because you're not taking in from your surroundings what you need to make things work out. So, I mean, this seems like a wake-up call to Thorfinn. Like, maybe you should, heed my words. He's like, because eventually I'm not going to be around. And then what are you going to do? So Thorfinn's like, kid, I've taken you in all this time, and I've kept you here, and I've been using you, but eventually even I'm going to be gone. So what will you do then? He's like, you'll probably die because you haven't learned anything. And he's like, shut up. And he keeps yelling. And it's like, Thorfinn is still the same 6-year-old child he was when Askelaad first had Thor's killed. He's shouting the same things he shouted back then. And Askelaad's like, you've not learned. And he's screaming. He's like, I'm going to kill you no matter what. And when Askelaad stops and says, come on. It's like, are you still saying that after what I just told you? He's like, you're just like a dog chasing after food. You're not self-reliant. He's like, I'm thankful for all your hard work. He's like, you've done a lot for me. He's like, all I have to do is put on an act and have these duels with you, and you'll do anything, and you'll go run off and fight somebody like Thorkel. You'll go on these suicide missions for me just because I do something stupid like this. It's like, you're a useful kid. But that line, that's like the biggest insult. You're a useful child. Like, I can use you, and you've not grown up and matured. You're still a kid. And that's all you are to me. So yeah, it's so complicated because on the one hand, everybody in the comments, I'm sure it's so layered and complicated and complex, the relationship between these two characters. Because on the one hand, he just views Thorfinn as a tool, right? But on the other hand, he tells him this story. He teaches him things. He wants Thorfinn to be more, I feel. I feel like Askelaad wants Thorfinn to become more than what he is. He's like, you have potential to be so much more, but you're not doing it, right? And Askelaad is not the type of person that's going to sit down. This was the most step-by-step guide he could have gave Thorfinn. He's like, look, I'm going to tell you how I killed my dad. This is the step-by-step of how I did it. Read between the lines. Figure it out. Like, he's like, I'm not going to hold your hand and walk you through it. He's like, this is the most hand-holding I'm going to do for you, Thorfinn. Now, what are you going to do with it? And the first thing Thorfinn does is completely ignore the point of Askelaad's story to yell at him again. He's like, you just don't learn. It's so good. It's so good. And then he's like, unbelievable. He's like, I must thank Thor's too. That was the big insult. He's like, I have to thank Thor's too. He's like, Thor's for giving me this useful kid. Oh, that's such a cold blow. And you can interpret that line a lot of different ways. Like, is he thinking that eventually he's going to meet up with Thor's in the same place? Does he put him on the same level as Thor's? That could be insulting to Thorfinn if he's like, I'm on the same level as your dad in terms of understanding and being a warrior that you are not. Or it could be like, your dad was weak and didn't teach you all the proper things and spoiled you so I could use you. So you could view it in a lot of different ways. I'm going to be curious to see what people say down below, how they view that line of, I must thank Thor's too. Like, I'm curious. I can kind of see it in multiple ways, but I'm curious to know how you guys all interpret that line. Because that's what gets Thorfinn. That's the final straw. That just like the dagger to the heart, right? Mm-hmm. That's what breaks him. And then he's like, wait. And it's like, that's the thing. He's like, stop, wait. And then he's like, shut up. And I like that Canute's like, hey, you're going to hurt yourself. And he tells him to shut up and be quiet. Thorfinn's at his lowest point. at this point right here. And Canute's like, it's everyone at this point is like looking down on Thorfinn. Askelaad's like, you learned nothing. You're a baka. Bye. Don't have time for you. If you won't learn from me, I'm not wasting my time anymore. So he's viewing Thorfinn horribly. Canute is like, hey, you need to slow down and heal your wounds. Like, attack him at another time. So Canute doesn't really... He's not really mad at Thorfinn. Askelaad's mad at Thorfinn. Askelaad's mad because he's not learned anything. He's still an idiot after all these years. Canute feels sympathy for him. He's like, hey, heal your wounds. Like, it's okay. He's kind of babying him a little bit. And Canute's like, and it's so crazy because, like, Canute is the taller one now and, like, stands so tall and proud and is, like, holding him back. And it's like their roles have so reversed, right? Canute's gone through all this growth that Thorfinn has not. And I feel like Thorfinn falling to his knees in front of Canute is very symbolic. And then Thorkel's just like, you're pathetic. Like, he's just like, you're being pathetic. Like, come on. Like, what's up? Grow up. It's kind of how Thorkel takes it. And Canute's just like, he just sighs. So yeah, you have Thorkel that thinks Askelaad, that thinks Thorfinn's pathetic. Askelaad who's pissed off at him because he's being a baka. Canute that just kind of feels pity on him. And these are all things Thorfinn does not want, right? None of this is what Thorfinn asked. And then Bjorn just gets lifted up by Askelaad. Like a man that's leg is injured. He just lifts up this giant of a man and walks away with him. And then Canute asks, like, why me? Why don't you be king? He's like, you're the hero's descendant, Askelaad. You're the one descended from the hero. Why don't you be a king? Why don't you take the crown for yourself? But Askelaad's like, he's like, why don't you change the world and become the king yourself? And he's like, that's not the point. He's like, you're joking, right? He's like, weren't you listening just now? And he turns to him. I love it. He says, you're more suited to be the king. I can see it in your face, more than me or more than Swin. I can tell by looking at your face. Askelaad's like, he says, I'm just a Viking. Askelaad is very self-aware. He's like, look, I just told you all my story. My story was to get revenge on my father and to save my mother. He's like, I wasn't out to change the world or to do all these things. He's like, I wasn't seeking Avalon. He's like, my point was that I realized that if I was going to live and have the life I wanted, I had to do it for myself. But he's like, I've never wanted to become a king, and I don't want to go find paradise. He's like, I just want to live the life I want to. And he was like, I just wanted to save my mother and live a life that was mine. And now he is living a life that is mine. And he did save his mother by taking her back to her home country. But he's like, being a king is not, he's like, you're suited for that. That's up to you. And then Thorfinn he walks away from them all. He walks away from Canute and from Thorkel. He goes off on his own. So I'm wondering if that ties to the OP and Thorfinn like walking back towards the village away from everyone on his own. And he collapses, and that's when he has both the swords in his hands. And he holds that sword of his father's up and sees his reflection in it, like all battered and bruised. And he thinks back in backwards of how far he's come. He thinks back to him getting the sword of his dad's. He thinks to him having his arm broken, following them along. He thinks to him saying he's going to kill Askelaad back when they're on Stonehenge. He thinks back to him in the village, to him having his hair combed, to him as a kid, to him like killing the monster, to him crying. Like all back to the beginning. And him first swearing vengeance upon Askelaad. And it's just like him crying, realizing that it's all just been horrible. Like it's not gotten him anywhere. It's not gotten him anywhere. So maybe we got 2 episodes left. Maybe this will be a wake-up call to Thorfinn. Maybe Askelaad's words have finally reached him. I said this whole time that Thorfinn has been a stagnant protagonist and he hasn't gone anywhere. But again, we still have 2 episodes left. And I think and we still have season 2. So I feel like perhaps Thorfinn, this was the wake-up call of, dude, Askelaad finally came out and just said, I've been using you this whole time and you just haven't figured it out. You're just now getting it. So I'm very curious if Thorfinn's going to get left behind and if he's going to go back to Leaf. I don't know. If he's going to go back to him, I'm not sure. Because Askelaad just seems like he's fed up. He's like, look, this is as much of a hint as I can give you. Either act on it or bye. And then Canute's like, okay, well, I've got to go become the king. And Thorkel's going to follow. It's funny because Thorkel's like, get it together, Thorfinn. I'm staying with these strong people. So, I don't know what's going to happen in these next 2 episodes. But this episode was really good. I feel like maybe it was finally a kick in the gears for Thorfinn. Maybe he'll finally try to be observant or try to listen. Or not! Or he won't! And he'll just get more stubborn. I don't know. What I liked about this episode at the end was that it doesn't leave you on a cliffhanger. It's just like, oh, well, what's going to happen now? What direction are we going to go in? We have 2 episodes left. What all can we cover in 2 episodes? This episode did nothing like I thought it would and went in directions I didn't think it would. So I'm pretty excited about that. But I'm very curious to see where it's going to go. And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts down below. So this episode, there's a lot of cool tie-ins with Askelaad and Thorfinn and Canute. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about them. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with episode 23 of Vinland Saga.